Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Ben Hunter, Booktopia's fiction category manager. This is a podcast about books and the brilliant people who read them and write them. Emily Bitto is a Melbourne-based writer. She does fiction, poetry, and non-fiction. She has a master's in literary studies and a PhD in creative writing from the University of Melbourne. Her debut novel, The Strays, was winner of the 2015 Stella Prize, and her latest novel is called Wild. Thank you for joining me on the podcast over Zoom.
For having me.
Now you're joining me. So I just wanted to ask at the end, how are things? Are you okay?
Thank you for asking. Yes. Look, it's a pretty strange time, but I think being a writer helps through strange times. It's definitely been a very interesting time to live through.
Yeah, that's it's one way of putting it. I've got so much more going through now, having been in for a couple of months now. Once it just seems to stretch into, and it affects the whole psyche of a community. Really odd way, being on the other side of it too.
Actually, something I really noticed, several times, extended lockdown in Melbourne is just how out of it, but then people don't quite know how to interact. They used to, I had some quite strange kind of catch up lockdown where it just felt like socialize anymore.
Yeah. Interesting. I have had a way in the kind of dark days of getting an early copy of Wild Abandon. It is a serious book. It captures so much of the old animosity of the age that we live in. It's this story of this anxious, straight, white, middle-class young guy having a kind of quarter-life crisis and running away, getting himself into a grand old shitstorm. So what interested you to devote a novel to this character, to Will?
Look, I guess lots of things. I feel like there's not sort of one sort of simple answer to that, but part of it was that after writing The Strays, which was kind of a historical novel, I wanted to write something very contemporary. It's set in 2011, so it's not quite contemporary, but, set in the strange kind of time that we live in, and, a book that sort of thinks about the time that we live in. And I also was particularly interested in sort of writing like a travel or journey narrative. And I guess that's where the kind of young male protagonist came in, because I got really interested in sort of thinking about the young man's quest, the sort of hero's journey as a narrative structure that, has been around forever, and that, I've always kind of been really drawn to, in a way, everything on the road, which is books in this novel,
Yes.
but, everything, myths and fairy tales and, books that I was really obsessed with when I was a kid, like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, and, these kind of adventure narratives that, always felt so romantic and mythological, but at the same time, as a kind of young female reader, I always felt a bit sort of shut out of that narrative, because it felt like it wasn't really something that was allowed for me as a female reader and person in the world, that it's a very masculine sort of story. So I guess that's like a bit abstract, really, as a reason for writing Will as a character. And he, I guess just developed, out of all of that. But also, I co-own a bar, and so for the first kind of 2-3 years that I was writing or thinking about this book, because I wasn't getting much writing done because I was working crazy hours in a bar, but I was kind of working with a lot of young guys, and they were sort of the main people I was spending my time with. And the other thing that I sort of became really interested in from sort of thinking about these ideas about travel and masculinity and stuff was that talking to them about travel, one thing I started noticing was their age when, I was kind of making my first, all my friends were kind of just out of school and go to Europe and the UK and, spending whatever. And they all wanted to go to New York. And so that just really kind of got me thinking about the way that the destination of elsewhere, the romantic elsewhere for Australians, or the cultural centre has kind of shifted. So that was, something else that really set me down that path of thinking about the relationship between Australia and America, which is sort of at the heart of this book, and then ideas about travel, that journey out into the world to kind of try and find it.
And Will, I love it. He struggles so much.
He does.
I think about where he would have begun from as this. He talks about he's very, very conscious of his own image, and he talks about even wearing in the context of the girlfriend that he's had a falling out with. He talks about meeting her and wearing his hipster uniform.
Yeah.
And what strikes me about him is and like it's a way I really related to him is he's in Melbourne and he's aspiring to New York and America and the bigness and the vastness and the grandiosity of that, but he's not even a Melbourne guy. He's a small town guy who's trying to play in the big pond of Melbourne. He's not even on the same socioeconomic and really like cultural ground as everyone else. But I think as part of his, I don't know, white male psyche, he feels like he's entitled to it, right? He really wants it. He thinks he should be on equal footing or higher footing than those around him, and it makes him throw his ships upon the rocks so many times. And so we begin in this wild vision of New York in this novel. It's a city of huge excess, and you've really affected a reel in trying to capture it, and you use a lot of really heavy and brilliant, sparkling language to do that. Tell me about trying to capture New York through the eyes of this wayward kid.
I mean, I guess, what you kind of picked up on with him being a small town guy, not even really feeling like he's kind of got to a point where he feels like he belongs in Melbourne, and then going to New York where he just feels so much more, parochial and like a sort of hick country boy. So I sort of wanted to try and represent that partly through the language, his absolute sort of sense of being overwhelmed by the excess and the impossible kind of coolness that he perceives in New York. But I guess I also, one of the things, as I said, I wanted to just write something about the kind of strange time we live in. And I think part of what I see as kind of characterizing that in the, developed West is just this kind of absolute sort of excess in every possible way, you know, whether it's kind of food culture or the art world or you know, again, kind of, it's probably something I think about a lot because I work in that sort of hospitality, food and kind of cocktail culture world, and how strange that is, and how, you know, everything that you could possibly sort of dabble in opens up this world of kind of knowledge and cliquiness that is just potentially sort of endless. And, you know, so he is kind of just opening his eyes to all of that, and at every turn just realizing how much he has to learn and how kind of uncool he is. And I guess, you know, maybe on a sort of metaphorical or allegorical kind of level, I want to gesture to that sort of cultural cringe in, you know, Australian identity as well, that you know, that looking outward and feeling insignificant or not cool enough, that, you know, I think Australians have had a tendency to feel. Not that I endorse that, but
Yeah. And on the other side of that, I feel there's this magnetic attraction to the cultural heartland, as it was, that, you know, they see New York as, but when they arrive, it both mystifies and horrifies, because there's a familiarity in the food and the language and the people, but it's just heightened and more expensive. You know, that's I haven't been to America, but I went to London when I was, you know, a young 20-something, and that was my takeaways. It was a cold, expensive Sydney.
Yeah.
You must have had a lot of fun in creating the character of Paul, you know, as a means of focusing a lens on that foodie bar scene of which you were kind of you know, immersed in, with co-owning this bar. Paul is a character.
Yeah, Paul is kind of an exaggerated mishmash of every chef I've ever met.
He puts a lot of stuff up his nose, and it's not it's not insignificant that he knows Paul from boyhood, and he used to just outright bully the guy.
Yeah.
But now they're on a different footing. You know, Paul is rolling out the red carpet to Will and trying to you know, show off, right?
Yeah.
there's so much showing off with Iron Chef dudes. I don't know what it is. Yeah, you must have had a lot of fun in crafting those scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun kind of writing the whole New York scene. It is kind of pretty over the top, I think, but you know, in every sense, like the language, as you said, and I guess I just, you know, I wanted to kind of show that sort of too muchness of this experience that Will is having, and that I think kind of says something about the, you know, the world that we live in sort of the sunset days of capitalism.
Yeah, and exacerbating the parochialness of Will is his little foray into the fine arts scene, which happens pretty much by accident. Paul is has a terrible relationship with a girl who has a show, and it sets up the most wild night for little Will. How did you go about kind of writing that scene? And I love that you showed us that scene through his eyes, as such an outsider who wanted so desperately to be an insider, even for one night.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I guess the art world and visual art is something that I've always been really into as well. You know, that there's a kind of link with the strays there, and that I'm just fascinated by the, you know, art, visual art. But I think, you know, when I was thinking about the different aspects of culture that, you know, represent the sort of pinnacle of what Will is looking for, and that represent the kind of peak of, you know, that sort of strangeness and excess that characterize, you know, I guess a sort of commodity culture in a way. Like I think the art world, in, you know, in particular versions of the art world, seem to sort of be almost the epitome of that. And so I wanted to kind of include that to show, you know, the sort of ultimate scene that Will could be, you know, aspiring to belong in if things were different, if he was a different person. So it's, you know, it's like his kind of peak experience, I guess, in his New York adventure, and then it just all basically goes downhill from there.
Yeah, it really was the most terrifying bit of the novel to read, as someone that you can't help but root for the guy. But it's my favorite part of the book. It's just so gorgeously drawn. Was it a challenge writing from the perspective of that male gaze? I mean, Paul, you know, Will spends a lot of time with Paul, who has a really bad interactions with women, and Will, you know, he's a witness to that, but he doesn't know how to deal with it. And Will himself, as a young guy, he doesn't have a lot of language or wherewithal to act on, you know, his desires, as they were. But he can't see the women around him, at least the young women around, the young able-bodied, mainly white women around him, without sizing them up or evaluating them on the value of their compatibility with him as a potential sexual partner, right?
Yeah.
Is that how do you write that, or does that just come easy because the world forces that on you?
Maybe partly, but I guess I did have fun, and you know, one of the main things that I really knew I wanted to kind of explore in this was the sort of the narratorial perspective. So it's third person narration. It's not sort of, you know, you don't see everything through Will's eyes from a first person perspective, but it's very close third person. So there's kind of a lot of Will's inner experience sort of embedded in the prose. But I was really interested in sort of creating a bit of a tension between those different levels. So the kind of third person omniscient narrator's voice, and then Will's experience, and, you know, playing with that in a kind of ironic way, I guess, so that we kind of know that, you know, the novel is not sort of placing Will's view as the sort of real or kind of only way of seeing the world, that we sort of sometimes get this sense that probably a lot of the time, that he's coming from a very specific kind of point of view and experience, and that other people around him are experiencing things quite differently to how he's experiencing them, including the women that he comes into contact with, but at the same time kind of not showing him from a sort of mean or judgmental perspective. Like, I actually did really genuinely want to kind of inhabit his perspective in a kind of empathic way. So it was, I guess it was sort of a tricky balance, but one that was sort of at the center of what I was trying to explore in this, those kind of shifting perspectives. And there's a lot of shift in even the kind of language between the sections that are, you know, a bit more of that kind of high style, which is very much not Will's voice, and then going into his kind of his more, like, there's a lot of dialogue that is very different in tone from the third person narratorial style. So yeah, it was fun just sort of doing that as I went along, and it was kind of like a sentence by sentence process of getting that constant sort of shifting and building up that sense of kind of tension between Will's perspective and something else that's, you know, not, I wouldn't say it's kind of me and authorial perspective, but it's a sort of stylized third person narrator.
I love that. I also love the change in gears this novel has. There's a real change in pace when Will finally gets out of the city, nearly completely broke, and he ends up in small town Ohio. I think the town is called Little Proud. Tell me about the character of Wayne Gage and how. Why did you want to bring him and Will together?
So that's kind of the second part of the novel, which is longer than the New York section, was another sort of almost a separate strand that started the process of writing this. And it came about from a news story that I read in 2011, which I will not disclose the details of, because it does kind of give away some of the major aspects of the plot. But that second part and the character of Wayne was kind of loosely inspired by a true story that I read about, which was set in Ohio and around a guy that had a big collection of exotic animals, which this was kind of pre-Tiger King, so it was a completely new world to me. It just seemed like so incredibly bizarre and fascinating, this kind of idea that people could legally collect 50 something lions and tigers and bears and wolves and leopards and things in the midst of rural Ohio. And again, it kind of just spoke to all of those ideas that I wanted to explore about the strangeness of the time that we live in, and the kind of excesses, and and then also something else that's a really long-standing preoccupation for me, which is the relationship between humans and animals. And so I guess the character of Wayne, he came about from a real story that I read, but then obviously I just had to kind of create my own version of this person. So he's not actually based on a real guy, but I wanted someone that was a sort of foil for Will, I guess. He's, there are a lot of kind of male characters in this book, and he's older than Will. He's probably Will's father's age. He's a Vietnam veteran. He sort of represents some things that Will admires. He's sort of lived a very, quote, adventurous life, but he's also very kind of troubled. And I think part of what, getting back to that idea of the sort of masculine quest, and that idea of those early sort of what you might call like initiation experiences in young men's lives, what Will is seeking is to kind of go out into the world and come home a changed person, a man in some ways, probably, although he would be embarrassed to kind of admit that to himself. And Wayne, on the other hand, had a completely different version of that, in that he was sent to Vietnam at probably younger than Will, and that's kind of had a completely devastating impact on him.
Yeah. When Will sort of shows up in town, Wayne just seems really eager to have him under the wing.
Yeah.
and it's to Wayne, it's like it's fated, and that he perceives himself taking on I'm not going to say father figure, but like a soothsayer kind of wisdom speaking role in Will's life, and he sees that as some kind of redemption in himself, and it's not, the reader can tell that Wayne is troubled immediately, but it's not quite certain as to what the level of damage there is, and what exactly is going on.
Yeah.
What does Will see when he rolls into this town?
Look, I mean, I think Will at this point in time is kind of just seeing the world as the backdrop for his own journey. He sees everyone he comes into contact with and everything he kind of encounters as just part of his journey, as if he was a character in a novel, which he doesn't know he is, or a protagonist in a film. He is the hero of his own journey, and he struggles to kind of see himself as a worthy hero, but he desperately wants to be one. And I think he is sort of caught up in that, that model of the kind of journey narrative that might be epitomized by something like On the Road, where he just wants to have his experience, and everyone that kind of comes into contact with him is a sort of bit part in his story. So I think he sort of meets Wayne and he thinks, oh, what a kooky guy. He's got all these lions and tigers. That'll be a good story. I can tell when I go home. I won't have to kind of go home a complete failure, because I will have had this kind of wild experience that I can sort of retell. And he doesn't really think much more than that. He also probably admires certain aspects of Wayne's character. As I said, that Wayne's kind of on the surface really kind of made something of his life. He's gone out and done things, and he's Will's greatest fear is kind of turning into his dad, who's a very sort of passive character who had one overseas trip when he was young, and then found out his girlfriend was pregnant and kind of went home and married her, and never sort of, in Will's view, never did anything else again for the rest of his life. And Will is just absolutely terrified of turning into that, and he just wants adventure, and he wants to kind of not be that.
Yeah, that's so true. That comes up again and again in the novel, is the father's failure, and this idea that because he came home, that made him a failure. Because he returned, that was the end of his story, not the beginning of a new story. There's like this there's this fear of shame with Will that just pervades everything he does, and I felt really seen in reading that. I want to ask, what how do you research, you this story came into your world pre the phenomenon of Tiger King on Netflix, and the whole Joe Exotic thing. How did you research it, and without spoiling the ending, and in your mind, like what attracts people to trying to own these kinds of animals? Like to the average person, it just seems like a abhorrent thing to want to do, to have lions and tigers and bears and wolves in essentially just a family home.
Yeah, I know. I guess that question of what makes people want to do that was something that got me really interested in this story. And I guess part of what the answer to that I sort of came to was, there's something in, the presence of the sort of wildness of those animals, the kind of undeniable, even if they've been hand reared from cubs, there's something undeniably wild and sort of sublime in a way about being in the presence of a full-grown tiger. And I did go to Ohio when I was researching this, and I went to a sanctuary where they had a lot of big cats rescued from private zoos and things, and that got to be kind of quite up close to them. And there is something really quite incredible about being in proximity to these creatures. And then the other side of it is that a lot of these animals are on the point of kind of extinction in the wild. There's estimated to probably be more tigers in homes and kind of enclosures in America than there is in the wild, over the rest of the globe, which is just such a bizarre thing. And I think on a definitely vastly exaggerated scale, there's something similar to why we want kind of dogs and cats as pets. There's something about this, the kind of proximity to animals, what that sort of gives us as humans. And I guess I tried not to sort of be too moralizing or judgmental about it, but just to think about it. What is it that we're craving from our contact with animals? And I think there's a part of me that can kind of see that if you had a tiger cub that you'd raised from very small and bottle fed, and you could go into its enclosure and it would come up and like embrace you, that would be a pretty wild experience. And I don't think it's a good thing to do, obviously, but I think it fits in with a lot of other stuff that we crave as humans in this sort of current moment of being so, for the majority of particularly sort of urban dwellers, so cut off from nature, and the feeling of kind of ourselves as animals and our sort of smallness as human beings, and the kind of the fact that we could be prey still, the feelings of vulnerability and sort of that feeling of the sublime that I think that the contact with those sorts of animals can create, that's probably quite powerful and profound as well. And all of that stuff, I guess, was what I sort of came to as a theory, I guess, of why people would want to do this. Yeah,
That's brilliant. It's a lot to comprehend, and I think the way you presented the character of Will and putting him in that scenario is just gorgeous to read. It's really special. I want to ask now. I just don't want to. You've said all this brilliant stuff, and I don't want to tinge that by laboring on minor points of the book. It's glorious, and I want people to just get out and discover it. You've taught writing or creative writing for a number of years. Can I ask what do you learn from that? What do you learn from your students, and what's the one thing you kind of hope from spending time and money with you that they take away from it?
I guess what I learned from students is just, I think, over and over again, how much persistence and courage and sort of stubbornness in a way it takes to actually write a novel and sort of finish it. And I really, I feel like I really probably only managed to do that, especially the first time around, through the support of my supervisor that I had at the time, because I wrote The Strays as part of a creative writing PhD. And, I don't know if I would have actually finished it if I hadn't had that sort of ongoing support. And I think it's, I really admire my students, many of whom are kind of in a lot more challenging situations than I was. A lot of them are kind of parenting, especially now they're in lockdown, homeschooling. They're kind of getting up at like 5 or 6 in the morning to get in some writing time. And they just kind of blow me away with how gutsy they are to keep doing that. And I think, if anything, what I think having a sort of ongoing relationship with a teacher provides is more just that sort of accountability and reminder that, you're doing this, just keep doing it, try and do it every day if you can, or at least keep thinking about it every day if you can't write every day. Obviously there's other sort of more specific craft things that I try and kind of teach. And I guess my main focus, I would say, is on, really specific sort of language level stuff. I really like talking about prose style and, analysing the work of other writers as a way of teaching writing. I really have a focus on reading as a way of learning to write. But yeah, I think more than anything, it's just, you just have to kind of do it. The people that kind of finish books are the ones that just keep plugging away. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Do you think there's a big portion of students that go through your programs that you see potential for great stuff, but there's going to be that drop off of just not everyone's going to be able to commit to doing the work?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot of the time the teaching that I'm doing now is with the Faber Academy, which is like a sort of year-long writing course. So that's quite different from, say, teaching, a first-year uni creative writing tutorial or something, where it's like a lot of people don't even necessarily know if they're interested in writing. They're just sort of trying it out. And that's fine. It's really fun to teach. But the people that I'm teaching in this year-long course, they all want to actually write a novel, and they've all got an idea and they're all working away on it. So I think most of the time I have a lot of kind of faith that they will finish it. But, it's always a struggle, and there's just so many things in life that get in the way of that.
The people, with my job as a fiction manager, this book website, people will ask me, oh, Ben, you must read so much. And I kind of say, well, I read a tiny smidgen of what gets published, and then of what is actually published, that is only a tiny smidgen of what is created. And,
I know.
It's mind blowing how much great work is out there and undiscovered and unread. And like still yet to be written, and possibly about to be written right now. It's what makes it really exciting. You spoke a little bit about craft and language. One of the things, we spoke a little bit about the hyperreal and using extremities of language to kind of express this late capitalist New York vision, which is really brilliantly done. This is one of those novels that I read and savoured sentences, and I kept the phone handy so I could look up words in the dictionary. And sometimes that's something I don't want to do. Sometimes that's done out of frustration. But in the case of Wild Abandon, it was done with relish and joy. It was finding new gems. What's your rules, or what's your advice, or what's your thinking around choosing big words in prose, when to do it, when not to?
I mean, I think for me, it's all about kind of what you want to achieve, and that, I definitely don't endorse kind of style for style's sake. I think that, I think I've kind of said this before, but I think of words as, it's the essential medium that you're working with as a writer. And I do feel like often, particularly in sort of contemporary fiction, that there's a bit of a neglect of how you can actually use that in so many different ways. It's like the focus is more on the content. And if you were to kind of compare that to, say, painting, it's like just focusing on what is being painted rather than, are you using the paint thickly? Are you using oils or watercolors? Is it sort of saturated colors or muted colors? And I think, that's obviously a part of looking at a painting that everyone kind of takes note of. But a lot of the time, I think writers don't tend to sort of put that much emphasis on what you can do with language as a medium to contribute to the whole. So it's not just about kind of being showy or whatever. It's about, like, what I wanted to show in this novel was that feeling of, this kind of almost too much sort of onward rushing, not looking back, breathless, sort of more feeling. So that's a bit of a clunky way of describing it, but it's what Will is trying to do. He's trying to just kind of escape his heartbreak, not think about the kind of crash that's coming. And it's something I think that we're sort of trying to do in a way in the world, with these kind of impending feelings of sort of dread of climate change and things like that there's a tendency to kind of just rush forward and immerse ourselves in the excesses of the world around us, which are, amazing and beautiful and overwhelming. And it's that's why I wanted to use that language, just to kind of show that through the prose as well as through the kind of content, essentially.
I love that. Just talking about it makes me want to go read this book again. It's such a wonderful thing. I really hope it finds a wide readership. You've written not just fiction. You've written poetry and non-fiction as well. Do you have a preference for a different mode, or will you write another novel again soon?
I hope so. I think fiction is probably, and novels specifically, I do struggle with short fiction for some reason. I think I just tend to be drawn to longer forms, and the level of kind of detail of character and psychology, I guess, that you can play with in a novel form. Like I used to write a lot more poetry, and I struggle, I think, while I'm writing a novel to write poetry. So I'm sort of hoping now that I've kind of finished this one that maybe the poetry will come back. I do really love writing poetry and reading poetry. But I think, if there was one form that is probably my main thing, it is the novel.
Well, I can't wait to have another novel from you.
It'll probably be a while.
Emily Bitto, thank you so much for your time and generosity, and for being on the Booktopia podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been great fun.
Wild Abandon is published by Allen & Unwin, and you can get it right now from booktopia.com.au.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free, and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast, and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.